Good morning.
Hey, brother. Long time no see.
Yep, it's been, man, I don't even know how long.
Yeah,
At
count the
least
days.
at most a week.
At most a week, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A week feels long. It's felt long.
Yeah. Time's always feeling long. So how's it going? Any
I feel great. I just feel so fantastic.
yeah, yeah. Feeling
How are
feeling
you?
I bet you're feeling more awake than you normally are when we're doing these things.
Yeah, maybe like it feels like it's an hour or so into my day instead of just starting my day.
Right.
Yeah.
Um so I wanted to kick off, or maybe you wanted to kick off. I don't even know. But mutually, we wanted to kick off a conversation on our favorite controllers, or what we like in controllers. Maybe I don't know.
I definitely wanted to kick that off. I would say why don't we let's kick it off.
So back in the day, you're using an Atari for the first time. Did you feel anything was missing?
Um, More than three colors on the screen. Background music.
But the controller was fine, right?
The controller was really miserable. Yeah, I can't even make any sort of joke. It's funny. I actually did play. I don't know what your experience was. I played like NES before I ever played Atari.
Yeah, I think I did too.
Yeah, and then I had a cousin that was much older than me, like in his like 20s, which at the time was like, whoa, like I'll never be that old. And
Yeah.
he had an Atari, and so I remember like being at my grandparents' house, and they did not have a Nintendo, and being bored and being exposed to the Atari, and it was like this magical blast from the past, weird like thing, right? And it was fascinating for me at the time, even to like observe the evolution of technology.
Mm,
And I mean, you can of course see that in the controller, which is our topic of the day.
mm.
I would say I can see what you're hinting at, and I do think very strongly that the D-pad must be one of the greatest inventions of Nintendo of all their inventions.
You so you obviously started with the North American systems, right? You weren't like weirdly into a Famicom or something first, right?
Weirdly into, not like now where am weirdly into it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I bet I was exposed to clone Famicoms much earlier than most North Americans. But yes, NES was my first exposure. If you're referring to the hardwired controllers on the Famicom.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just kind of, I don't know, jumping around mentally, I guess, because for me, I think it was probably Donkey Kong. The arcade was the first game I played, maybe.
Like
Which
ever.
was, yeah, I think so. Like I think I played that at a campground when I was really young, and like have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that had a joystick.
I'm certain it had a joystick. I mean, the second one had a joystick. They had joysticks for a long time. I feel like the arcade never really dropped the joystick so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, it. I guess it made sense. Like just the overall design of the machine, it didn't really make sense to have like a periphery sticking out at first.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it totally had a joystick and one button. So I remember being amazed when I played a game for the first time, and it's this giant, like, I don't know, uh, carnival like experience where it's a machine at a location that you have to go to, as opposed to having something attached to your TV.
Yep. Yeah.
But like ergonomically, I didn't enjoy the experience.
It's funny that I mean I don't like it. The joystick and D pads are very different things, kind of, right? And they like to this day, people who play fighting games still use the joystick, right? Like I'm pretty
Mm.
sure even like people who are playing like Street Fighter Five or whatever are using a joystick,
Yeah.
and I get it, like just the way you can move back and forth without wrecking your thumb and so forth. Like there's applications for it, but I think as like just a straight standard input, especially with like when you look at the library of games that exist,
Mm.
so many of them are so much more suited to a D-pad, which I mean, I think is also why they were able to just do joysticks in the arcade because they would just have the game. Either the game is designed more for joysticks, or it's just like you say, like it's just this box at a location somewhere that you go to, and like it's just this very enlarged. Like it's not like a handheld controller; it's just this big thing, and so you get this very arcadey style experience by having this big joystick to grab. But like the D-pad was just great, like great for what it was, right? I think
Mm.
take the arcade experience and go home. But then now that we're home and you have more time and you can play RPGs and you can do these other things,
Mm-hmm.
here's this fantastic controller. Boom, boom.
Yeah, yeah, I really liked that on the Nintendo. Like, I mean, I remember it like hurting my thumb a little bit because it's like very rigid plastic.
I feel that way now more so than at the time, but yeah.
Um, but yeah, there maybe it's hard to tell whether it's like a chicken and egg sort of experience like that. That's kind of what I got used to, is using those D-pads, and all of the games were kind of built around that. Like, there were all these two-dimensional
Mm-hmm.
side-scrolling games where it's very clear that you want to go up or right or down, or maybe even diagonal or something, and it felt like
Exactly.
that style of input really made sense for that.
Well, I think that was the beauty of it, really. It kind of it like helped you hit those directions that were accepted by the game with high accuracy, right? You weren't going to be like on a joystick. It's very easy to kind of hit the joystick at a direction that is just in between right and diagonal upright, and then the game makes a call on what you actually put. Whereas like on a D-pad, that direction doesn't even exist to hit, right? You're probably just going to hit right when you try and do that, and so the game will just accept that as right, right?
Right. I wish I had had the foresight to get this all lined up. There's actually a book that I had started to read recently. I Am Error.
Oh, I read that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that was a fun book. I read
yeah,
that like forever ago.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm unfortunately, I'm like, I'm not that far into it. I'm still reading stuff about like Nintendo sprites and stuff right now. But I'm pretty sure I was reading something in there about how like the Game and Watch maybe was like built off of being a calculator. And so that's kind of where the D-pad came from, was that they were like doing these like non-analog signals that were like doable with like replacing the programming on a calculator to be like a discrete directions. And
Interesting. I would have thought probably too that the D-pad was a cost-saving measure.
yeah, well, I mean, it was cost saving in the sense that like the boards that they were using like for the whole architecture were based off of calculators.
Oh,
Like,
right, extreme cost saving.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that's kind of where that started, was the Game and Watch, and then it eventually migrated down to Nintendo, the entertainment system, or Famicom.
it's interesting if that's why they went, or maybe that's why they started looking at it. Or I don't know. There's probably like a lot of engineering decisions that went in there, but like the end result of the D-pad, I think, was just so fantastic. So whether it's for cost saving reasons or because it suited the architecture they'd gone with as a base, um, I don't know. I just think it's definitely one of Nintendo's grandest uh, baby baby steps forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize now for any noise. I have a kid that has woken up, so always great to.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I found that right here. So on page 24 in that book, it's an iconic element of the Famicom controller was a similarly repurposed innovation. Yokoi first devised the Plus controller, as it was originally known, for the Game and Watch conversion of Donkey Kong. The gameplay of many Game and Watch titles took place on a single horizontal axis and thereby required only two buttons for control. Uh, I don't know if I just read the whole thing, it'll get excessive. But yeah, that's to replicate this movement on the Game and Watch. The handheld would have needed five individual buttons, four for directional movements and one for jumping, to prevent uncomfortable button crowding while still accommodating the handheld's small footprint. Yokoi devised a novel control solution for a novel game. Uh, so early console controllers like the Atari were all using like joysticks, but then the plus directional thing was like a Nintendo innovation.
Yep. Okay. And I mean, we can look at the history of controllers and see that they basically never looked back, and so accept that that was the right
Yeah, yeah,
direction.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the one thing that I just kind of took for granted because I grew up with the NES was that they had the cord coming out of the top of the controller.
I'm trying to think. I mean, there's definitely exceptions to that, but was that an innovation at the time?
Well, the Famicom did it differently, right? Like the cable was coming out of the side of the controller for the Japanese console,
And they were also
and
very short. Yes.
I'm looking at the Sega Master System right now, and they did the same thing with the cable coming out of the side, and it's like it feels like such a bad design. I can't believe anyone did it.
I'm guessing. I mean, imagine a world where there's no controllers. Like the NES controller is yet to be invented, and you've
Yeah,
just invented it. Like I can. It seems outrageously silly now, like just
yeah,
totally bonkers. I can see at the time, like there probably wasn't even a concept of like this is how you would hold this controller, or
yeah. Like
like it's you can see
they
like people like pinching the controllers with their two hands, kind of instead of gripping it. And it's
yeah.
like no one knows that that's not how people are going to end up using it.
Well, apparently, like I don't know if it was Kmart or what at the time. They apparently had like training videos for their employees to show customers how to hold the controllers and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Another thing I think a lot of people look at the Famicom and just as you have right now, it's like they kind of scratch their head at the position of the wiring where it goes into the controller and the fact that they're hardwired. But it's easy to forget that the NES came out 2 years after the Famicom,
Hmm.
right? Which really is an eternity. I mean, they could have taken all the feedback from all the people playing it. I mean, it was a hit, right? Especially, I think I Am Air actually goes over some of this, but
Yeah.
um, not that I was conscious of what was going on at the time. Actually, Famicom I think was March '83 it came out, and so more than 2 years. Wow, I think the NES was November '85 or something. Whatever.
Hmm.
Anyway, quite a time gap, and so you can see them just taking a lot of that feedback and applying it and improving the design actually for the NES in a bunch of ways. And so I think that really came out with the controller, both with the wire placement and the way they were disconnectable and so forth. Um, so yeah,
And
I don't.
both controllers had a start and select, and neither of them had a
Yeah,
microphone.
yeah. I mean, I think the microphone was doomed for its international release from the start,
Yeah.
seeing it was a karaoke supporting mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, nobody really understood that it was used to weaken an enemy in Zelda.
I mean, they left it in the instruction book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know. I grew up with the NES controller, but I never enjoyed the rough corners on it. I remember having sore hands as a 6-year-old.
well, that's another really funny thing because I kind of don't, but now it's so obvious, right? Like, especially like if you just held even a Super Nintendo controller, like
Yeah.
for like 10 minutes, and you go to the NES controller, it's definitely like it jams into your hand, right? Definitely,
Yeah.
undeniably. Um, but I think that's another thing where probably when they made it, there was no other. I mean, imagine it's 1985. Like, if you don't like the NES controller, go find me the ergonomically comfortable one that you want to use instead, right? Like, there's just nothing out there that they could even compare to. So
Yeah, like the Master System controller looks
that's
very
an
similar to the
awful
Nintendo one.
controller. Yeah, it's very similar. It jams into your hand. It doesn't make very good use of the real estate on the
Yeah.
plastic it has. Like, there's just less buttons, and then the
Yeah.
D-pad is awful,
And then the cable is awful.
and it looks awful, and it's ugly.
Yeah. Um, I don't know. I'm largely. I mean, those early controllers felt awful, and I feel like Nintendo's done some awful controllers in the meantime too. Like I remember the N64 controller being just like very unwieldy.
I'm gonna spoil the whole thing, and I'm gonna go through what I think is the best controllers.
Yeah.
It's an extremely boring answer, but really, like the main line of like kind of whatever system was popular at the time. I think a lot of the time that was the company that was getting it right, and so you see
Yeah.
this clear progression that's excellent in my opinion from original Nintendo, which I think as a basis for all future controllers was fantastic. And then you
Yeah.
went with Super Nintendo, which made much better use of the real estate of the controller. So now you have the shoulder buttons and you have more options for your right thumb to hit. And it's also made some strides ergonomically, like it just feels great. To
Yeah.
the PlayStation controller, which now is even better ergonomically, it's starting to introduce analog inputs. And then from then on, for me anyway, I would just go with PlayStation controllers. I know a lot of people like the Xbox, 360 controller or whatever. I personally like that. Like
No, no,
I would
no. A lot of people like the Xbox One controller. I can't comment on the 360 because I haven't used it.
I maybe that's true too, but like I mean, think of like computer
Or
games.
no,
Like
no,
if
no, 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 sorry to interrupt. You were right. The 361 was where like a lot of people started liking it. I was thinking original Xbox.
oh yeah, no, not the, it was definitely 360 as the go-to controller for a lot of people for a long time, even on the PC. which
Yeah.
is fine. I mean, I don't think it's a crazy bad controller, but
Yeah.
that to me is kind of the line that made a ton of sense. So it's really easy to look at Nintendo and scratch your head because the NES controller felt great, the Super Nintendo felt great, and then I feel like from then on, Nintendo was all about making like, different from the status quo or different from mainstream, or let's be quirky and cool. And it started with Nintendo 64, which was such an awful controller. It was such
Yeah.
an awful controller. Like, I just don't know what they were thinking, even now.
Yeah. This, I don't know, this weird concept of like having the middle part to hold on to. It's like, it was confusing.
I have kid noises. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yes, I can hear.
um, one thing I've always found confusing is this tendency for controllers to be designed in such a way where you're you don't grip the hand in a symmetrical, or sorry, you don't grip the controller in a symmetrical way.
Mm.
To me, that feels very natural, intuitive,
That's
normal.
that's what I like about PlayStation.
Well, I'm actually accusing PlayStation a little bit of the same thing, where like I think so they had, I think the original PlayStation controllers
Mm.
lacked the analog sticks, right? And then
Yeah.
pretty quickly, I forget what they called it. Maybe that was the first Dual Shock controller. Was that right?
The DualShock, I think, was the first time where they had the dual inputs.
That you could press the analog controllers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, whatever. Their first controller with the analog stick, that was, it felt great. That was the first time they really landed on their kind of quite close to final design feeling controller, compared to those very early ones that didn't have that. And so they didn't change the position of the D-pad, and yet most games chose to, like, they opted to use the analog sticks as input.
Mm.
And so what you ended up doing was you took your left thumb and you kind of moved it downwards and lower than like where it would have been on, say, Super Nintendo. And I
Mm.
just felt like for that era, like you were either doing that on PlayStation, or if you were one of the weird kids and had a Nintendo 64, you were forced to do that. Your left hand was like closer to your right hand and but
Hmm.
lower. Like you held the controller in this weird orientation where your left hand is just diagonally to the left and down on
Yeah.
your right
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
And it still continues a bit to this day, I think, like where it's
Well,
just kind of standardized and having the analog stuff there.
well, I think what's interesting is we've gotten to a point where I feel like you can kind of see the evolution of the controller as the games changed, but you don't necessarily see the evolution of the games as the new controllers come out.
I
Uh,
think that's more true of recent controller changes, though.
yeah, yeah. And so that's what I'm kind of getting at is like if you look at the prototype Sony PlayStation was supposed to work with the Super Nintendo.
Yep.
And so I'm looking at a picture right now from denofgeek.com/games/PlayStation hyphen controllers hyphen history. Um, and if you look at that original prototype, it's a Super Nintendo controller. And so it made sense that when they went into their own hardware, it's a refined Super Nintendo controller. Like
Yep.
they have the D-pad, no joysticks, and your four face buttons, and it's got a nice grip. It felt pretty good at the time. Like it felt like an evolution, as you said.
Yep. Definitely an ergonomic step forward.
And then when they got into having the joystick, suddenly that was like seen as like an extra. And then like for games like Castlevania Symphony of the Night or whatever that were in that era, you're still playing it with the D-pad and you're still holding the controller symmetrically. But it's
Yep.
like as all the games come out, now you're holding the controller kind of asymmetrically, I guess.
Well, I feel like to your point, which is an interesting point about like what like the controller design following the games or game design following the controllers. I feel like sorry, this is
Yeah.
going to be our loud episode where I have kid
Yeah.
noises. Chill out. The and I lost my point. Yeah, I feel like back then, like Super Nintendo, PlayStation was kind of when the game, like the controller design led the games a bit. Like you had
Mhm.
Super Nintendo now, so companies were making games and they were slowly learning to maximize the control scheme for their games, such that you could use all these different buttons and like do all these different things. And so a lot of the early Super Nintendo games, like they didn't use the X button at all, or like whatever, right? Um,
Mhm.
and then in the PlayStation era, when they came out with the analog sticks, it was cool to use the analog sticks all of a sudden. So games that
Mhm.
didn't even necessarily need to use it were suddenly using it. If I
Yeah.
recall, I think Final Fantasy VII did not use it, and then 8
Mm.
did. Um,
It's been so long, I don't remember whether it forced you to use it. But yeah,
I
7 definitely didn't use it.
Yeah, I think 8 used it, and it felt natural to use it. It was just like the placement of it was so weird. But anyway, yeah, there's just like games that didn't necessarily need to use it because they were more Symphony of the Night-ish, where like that control scheme would have suited it. I just found that I don't know. I just people kind of did jump on the bandwagon a little bit with that.
So I think that's what's interesting about where the Xbox controller developed is they kind of started to realize that the analog input was
The
more
main thing.
important,
Yep.
and so they tried to move that so that it was you were holding the controller symmetrically as you're using it. Like the joystick is up top at the same, like your thumbs are in the same location.
Yep. Which I actually liked. I don't know how you feel.
I do like it, and to me, the problem that I still have with that is that most 3D games I want to control the camera, and I feel like I'm doing that a large chunk of the time, and so the thumbs are still asymmetrical. Like I'm keeping my thumb down, and it kind of works for first person shooters
Because
because
of your right thumb, you mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
like it works for first person shooters because you can move around with your joystick, you can look around with your joystick, and most of the time in those sorts of games, your trigger on the shoulder is your action button.
Yep.
I don't like it for a lot of like 3D exploration games where you're like interacting with stuff with like square or X,
Yep.
because you can't like comfortably move your camera around and interact with stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Good point. Really good point.
And that's actually something that I've noticed very recently because I've played through both of some walking simulators like What Remains of Edith Finch
Right.
and some more actiony stuff like Ghost of Tsushima, and that's on the PlayStation controller that I played those. And they made the trigger button the primary action button, like whenever you're interacting with stuff and you're using your trigger. So
Yep.
your hand is on the PlayStation controller gone back to something that's very symmetrical because you can keep your thumbs anchored to those two joysticks at all times. And
Yep.
then you're interacting with your two index fingers. And it, to me, that is a fantastic control scheme. I love it.
I fully agree. I mean, I have mixed feelings on the game, but like that was the control scheme used in Red Dead Redemption 2 as well,
Mm-hmm.
which I played through on the PlayStation 4, and so PlayStation controller, same deal. Totally get you. Totally hear you. Good point. It actually calls out to a point where like, I mean, I think the ultimate controller would be one. Like there is no ultimate controller, right? Because there's different games, and so like, how do
Yeah.
you solve this problem? Like, it's kind of a hard thing to get exactly perfectly right because when you design the controller for your game, you don't even know if in the next few years there's going to be like a change in what type of games are popular or what type of games will flourish on your system necessarily.
Yeah.
Unless you have, I was almost thinking like if they had the controller, like imagine it like rotated or something. Like you could literally crank the controller and change the location of the two, like the D-pad and the analog pad to suit the
Yeah.
game
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
night. Something like that.
Well, I find the Switch kind of interesting.
Switch is
With
interesting.
with
Yes.
the Joy Cons. The Joy Cons are a nightmare.
Seems like
I
you're one of those people that's one of many, certainly one of many that have had problems. I've never had problems. Maybe I've just been lucky,
I have problems with them for several reasons.
not just the
Um,
drift.
yeah, so I mean, I like them. There are games where they are great, like the Let's Go Pikachu games, for example, are great because it's like you can like use motion controls with them, like you're throwing Pokeballs to catch Pokemon and stuff, and it feels nice to just hold on to a single Joy-Con in the I guess it's vertical mode where it's like the way you would normally hold it, not like an NES controller.
Right. Yeah.
So there's some games where that feels great, but I have two major problems with it. One is that they went the Xbox route and they made the two hands asymmetrical.
Yep. Yep. I don't like that very
So
much.
so when you're playing single player, or sorry, when you're playing two player and each person has just a single Joy-Con, the two controllers feel completely different. Like there's like a big gap between the joystick on player two's uh, hand, like between the edge of the controller and the joystick,
Mm-hmm.
versus like I don't know. It feels really weird that the two controllers are suddenly asymmetrical when you're holding them in the horizontal position.
I think that's really weird, actually, to be honest.
Another thing that's really weird is that like the first Joy-Con has arrows on the buttons, and the second one has letters on the buttons.
Yeah, no,
So
that's
when
really, really weird that it splits in two, and then there's two basically different controllers for the same system.
and well, it's also problematic because like there's letters on the one, but they're expecting you in most games to hold it horizontally, so the letters aren't legible.
Good point. Yeah.
So then like what's extra weird is that like a lot of games will like give you UI prompts and they'll tell you like press A or press B or something, and then it's like if you're holding it in the horizontal mode with just a single Joy-Con and you're first player, you don't have any letters there, so you're trying to figure out what the hell it is you're trying to press. So it's like it's a UI or nightmare.
Yeah, they probably didn't think through that too well when they were designing it, I guess.
Yeah. But one thing that a lot of games I've noticed do to get around with that with their UI is when they're telling you what button to push, instead of saying press A, they'll like give you four circles and they'll just highlight the circle that you're supposed to press.
Yeah. Okay.
And that to me feels like a really great like universal display tip that could be used for Xbox, PlayStation, everything. Like if you did that, like you never have to question whether it's a triangle or a Y or an X that you're trying to find.
I fully agree, and part of it is because I still to this day refer to the like that kind of diamond shaped four button orientation by the Super Nintendo letter names,
Yeah.
which is different than the Xbox ones. And so then when the Xbox controller was like the standard controller used across all of whatever the indie game industry, it would always mess me up. It'd be like press Y, and my instinct is just to hit Super Nintendo Y, but that's X. That's Super Nintendo X, right? Or like even the PlayStation, like circle, square, triangle. To this day, I just think in my mind it's just burned into use the Super Nintendo letters. So some kind of visualization solves this problem explicitly, right?
Mm. Yeah, there's a definite confusion where people have had like the Ouya controller, for example,
Yeah.
has the O on the bottom versus PlayStation O on the right, and
Yep. Yep.
some
Yep.
games have A on the bottom Xbox and A on the right Nintendo. It's like it's frustrating. So I mean, I feel like that's a large part of it is like uh, the controllers probably can all be suited for like a specific purpose. Like I don't know, even if you go back to like the Atari thing, having just the single joystick. Like if I'm playing like a flight simulator or something, like having just a single joystick could feel great. Um,
Yeah. It's just kind of limiting. I mean, I have
yeah,
a few opinions there, and I'll say one more thing too. Like I think like you hop to Switch, so you've skipped a bunch of Nintendo
yeah, yeah,
systems
yeah,
in between that could be very well worth highlighting for their controllers,
yeah.
which is basically every system they've come out with, from GameCube, Nintendo 64 to GameCube to
The Wii
Wii
U.
U, yeah, all of them. But GameCube, particularly, for example, like I don't know how you feel about the GameCube controller.
I'm used to it. I mean, I didn't play anything really other than Smash and
But that's
Mario
the
Kart.
thing. I think it's like it's characteristic enough that when you design a game, you have to be very conscious of how to like you either design its control scheme very specifically for that
Yeah, yeah,
controller,
yeah.
or you suffer for it, right? Like it fails at being a good like generic controller. I think there's also things I really don't like about it. I've always found it really weird, like the position of the Z button or
Mhm.
Z. Like if you're playing a game, Smash Brothers is a good example, where you want to use that Z button, it's in the top right, and so you need to use your right pointer, right? And so like
Mhm.
the thing is, your finger is on the R key for the most part, and
Mhm.
the R key has this um, concave shape to it. So to switch your finger from the R key to the Z key to hit it quickly, it's very difficult to do because you can't really just like kind of slide your finger over. You have to like lift it up way off the R so you can get your finger up over
Mhm.
the lip of the R button to reach the Z key.
Yeah.
And then it's worse to go back because like you could kind of slide it up and off the R key. It would be uncomfortable, but you could do it. But then to get back from Z to R, it's a literal wall. You have to lift your finger up and over. And anyway, there's other things like that I could pick on the GameCube controller for. But like GameCube controller seems to suit Smash Brothers really well to me, but it doesn't really
Mhm.
like. I find it like I wouldn't program it like I have it connected to my computer, for example, but I wouldn't play like Celeste with the GameCube controller. It'd just be really weird.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
man, the D-pad was just awful on that.
the D-pad was awful. Yes, the D-pad was very awful, and which is weird. Like I don't Nintendo just makes some weird choices, but and Nintendo 64 was similar, where like the controller was just very maybe characteristic for certain games, but didn't work as a standard controller, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I can see like I feel like they designed it to have a controller for Mario 64, which is fine, I guess. I don't know. It's weird to me because like it goes back to how they made arcade games. Like when you made an arcade game, you ship the game in a giant cabinet, and so you would have a controller that matches that game perfectly. To
Yeah.
me, if you're selling a video game console and you want a controller to come with it, you like the sensible thing to do is to make as general a controller as you can for the type of games that are going to be released in your system. If you make a very characteristic controller, it's inevitable that there's going to be games that it just doesn't work for at all. And to me, it's a very problematic approach. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's kind of a shame that there aren't like more options. Like I never played Wii U. So like the idea of having this tablet never really seemed that relevant, but I have played DS games where they've got the little touchscreen on the bottom, and I can completely see it being cool to have games that are built around that, where you could have like a different display on one screen than you do on another screen.
It's funny when Nintendo DS came out. I remember at the time thinking it was the dumbest gimmick ever. There's two screens now. Okay, who cares? But like, I think they made really good use of it. And in retrospect, I don't think it's I don't think it's incongruent with my point I'm trying to make, because I actually feel like the touchscreen, especially nowadays in 2021, we can look at that as being a very general purpose thing. It might have felt kind of avant-garde in whatever year it was that DS came out, 2005 or whatever. But you basically have a fairly generic controller pattern with a touchscreen in the middle. Like to me, that's very general. And I think it succeeded because of that. Like you had games that didn't really use both screens, right? And then you had games that were fully based on using the screen. And so like people had a choice to develop one or the other, or kind of a hybrid between them. I don't know. I actually felt that was a very effective control scheme in retrospect anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, I can't get... it's hard when there's something that's like work related I want to bring up.
Yeah, I know what that's like. Or person related. So our common friend.
Yeah. But I think it could be interesting in some sort of a game where, I don't know, if you've got like a journal or something in it, where like if you had that touchscreen, you could like write and take notes and stuff, and or have like a game with a map where you could be like, I think Zelda...
I was gonna say this is like Crystal Chronicles, right?
Yeah, well, like Crystal Chronicles, and I think
Four Swords. Sorry, that's Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles and Zelda Four Swords. I think both did that.
I'm thinking of Phantom Hourglass, I think, did it, where it's like you could take notes on your map.
You could write the map. Yeah, that's
kind of... I feel like that is a mechanic that it could be used in a lot of games, but it's also like a pretty niche thing to build a touchscreen system for, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, Wii U was the attempt to take DS and make it their main system, and it was very much a failure. And so I don't anticipate we're going to go back to that anytime soon. Plus, I mean, cost-wise, you just see... I guess I'm kind of lying. Like Switch is that, isn't it? Are you even able to like... I don't know if you're able to have the Switch. You're not, right? You can't
have it both on the
both
TV.
On the TV and yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of a shame. I'm surprised they didn't make that a possibility. But maybe they were just so devastated by the Wii U that they needed to make sure it was different.
Maybe. We'll have to read up on it.
I mean, the Switch as a console has been fantastic. I'm pretty happy with it, but yeah, there's yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely a large part of it where it's like you know, some controllers feel better than others, but some games make better use of the controllers than others, which I guess is the thing. Like, I don't know. I played through Cuphead recently, and it's one of the few games where I customize the default controller layout to be something else, because I found it unplayable with the defaults they give you.
I almost always customize controls, actually, if I am able.
The way they start off in Cuphead is that you're using the D-pad to move around. It's 8 directions. You jump with the bottom button on the PlayStation controller, the X button.
Okay.
Sorry, cross button. You shoot with square, so it's jump and shoot are right beside each other, and then you can switch between your weapons with the shoulder buttons. You can lock onto enemies with another shoulder button, and you dodge with the triangle, the top button.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I felt like I could not dodge. Like there's lots of stuff where you jump and then you want to dodge, and having to switch my thumb from the cross up to the triangle, the bottom up to the top, just felt super uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So like I swapped it so that I dodge with the trigger button, so that way I can jump and shoot with my thumb, and whenever I need to dodge, I can use my index finger, and I can easily do that as I'm doing the other actions.
Go ahead.
So it's just interesting. Like it's that's not a problem with the controller. Like that's a problem with the developer making a choice that isn't as comfortable as it could be.
It's a weird choice to me because I mean the trigger buttons are always available. Like there's nothing else for those fingers to do except hit those buttons. Whereas your thumb has to maneuver between all these buttons in the front. And so like I feel like a lot of games fail to account for that. Like you should, if you have, like if your game only has 3 actions, to me your natural mapping should be like something you hit with your thumb, something you hit with your left, whatever, either index or whatever you prefer to use, and whatever you hit with your right index, right? Like you could just. Like, requiring you to move your thumb around to me really sucks. The way you've described it sounds a lot like on the Rockman X games, where I think the default, I forget what they had the dash as, it was Y or something, but I always switch that to L, and it's infinitely easier to do that.
Yeah, that was the exact same, and maybe that's where they're getting it from. Like I feel like it was jump, shoot, and dodge on Rockman. Mega Man was all on the same mapping, and I remember not knowing that you could customize the controls in that, and I played it with like this weird claw grip where my index finger was on the top button.
Yeah. Yes, no, I mean, to me, if you think about it, you have these fingers. If you could, I've almost thought of like a controller where I'm not saying this is a good idea, but like maybe if you pulled it off in an amazing way and designed it really well, if you had a controller that effectively like all the buttons are on the back, and like your except for your thumb, your other 4 fingers would like wrap around and they'd each have a button to press. Like I could see a game where that would work really well because you'd have 10 actions you'd need to do, or maybe 9 actions, and then your left thumb would be movement or something or whatever, right? But like those 4 fingers just would be ready to hit those actions in any combination at any time without moving around on the controller, right?
I recently moved my office stuff around, so I can't find it from my chair right now, but somewhere I've got an Oculus controller, and I feel like those Oculus controllers are great. Like I mean, if I were to compare those to the Joy-Cons, I would happily be playing these games with an Oculus Touch controller.
Do you think it's because of the button orientation?
Yeah, I mean, it also just feels really great to be able to like squeeze your hands around the controllers.
Yep.
And to be able to like have the sensors around that can like detect your movements and stuff. Like there's a lot of benefit to like being able to play like a bow and arrow type game or something, or a boxing game or something, and be able to swing your hands around and independently from one another, and then like I feel like there's less buttons overall that you can press, but there's like some gestures, I guess, depending on like how you extend your finger out and stuff, that lets you grab onto things. And
yeah, it's funny. I really do feel like we could revisit this topic in 5 years, and it's going to be laughable, the things we're talking about now with buttons and cord lengths and stuff, when the future is going to be all touch screens and waving your hands in whatever, like to make gestures and so on. I mean, I don't think it'll entirely be that way. Like even now, there's games I want to fall back to basically like a Super Nintendo controller to play because the D-pad suits the game or whatever. Like Celeste, I'm sorry, there's like I have a 8-bit do or 8-bit do or however you say that controller modeled after the Super Nintendo. I just could not play that game on an Xbox controller. I think we had this discussion. That said, I think you can look at different D-pads. Sorry, I'm really hopping around through topics, but my favorite D-pads. Okay, sorry. My favorite D-pads are the ones that actually do break it off into like 4 separate buttons. Like I think the PlayStation did
Yeah.
that, because it's very easy to hit the discrete buttons and have them be the direction you want them to go in. And
Yeah.
my least favorite are the ones where it's like it's not even a cross shape; it's like a circle,
Mm.
which is like the
The Sega Master System.
Sega Master System's awful controller, or like a lot of systems do that. The older Xbox controllers do that.
Yeah.
It's just awful. I'll try and hit left, and it just, I don't know. Part of it too is the design of the games, right? Like if you're playing a game on an emulator, it's interesting because if you think of how, like when that game came out in whatever year, like if it's an older game, they the developers of course knew it was on whatever system and the person would be playing with whatever controller, and so it was easy
Mm.
to say, okay, if you want to go left will do this, right will do that. On an emulator, if you have a modern controller, and it's up to the designer of the emulator too maybe, but I find a lot of times it's like you'll move maybe more of an analog, either an analog stick or more of one of those circular d-pads. You'll hit say left on it, but you're actually not hitting exactly perfectly left. It's like kind of at such an angle, it's like,
Yeah.
90% left but slightly upward. And so for an emulator, it'll say, oh, this person's hitting left and up. And your
Yeah.
character will jump, even though you're not hitting up. You're not doing like a
Yeah.
Street Fighter or something. Like, come on, or they'll duck and just stop and you'll die. So I think modern games will say, okay, well, they're basically hitting in the kind of the leftish direction that's left. Whereas
Yeah.
the older games, you have to somehow convert that signal back into like the hard set directions, right? And
Yeah.
so Celeste is a good example of like just a game that is more recent, but like its control scheme just suits that older or like a different style than what is conventionally normal. So I think even as controllers, like if we get into this world where it is all like gestures and touch screens, there's still always going to be a place for the D-pad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you were using the 360 controller for Celeste, which is more of that rounded
That's the one.
thing. And I remember being so confused with that because you were talking about how awful it is to play with the Xbox controller at the time, and I was using an Xbox One controller, and I was finding it completely great because it does have like those more discrete button clicks as you go in unique directions and stuff.
I had the opposite thing where I was like, how can you stand this? I have no idea how you can casually say you have no idea what I'm talking about. I completely am perplexed by this.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I really enjoy a lot of the Switch stuff, but I feel like I would enjoy it better with an Oculus touch controller.
Yeah.
One thing that's kind of interesting, like you were saying, like, I don't know, we might look back in a few years and think this is kind of laughable and stuff. It's like I've got the DualShock, the DualSense controller in my hand right now, the PlayStation 5 controller.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty great controller, in my opinion. They do a lot of stuff in it that is kind of unique. They've got programmable pressure sensitivity in the triggers.
Yeah.
So like, for example, like you could have something where it's like emulating a camera for photography, and like you can slightly press the trigger button down a little bit, and then there will be some resistance after like you've pushed it down a couple millimeters, and then you can click through to actually snap the photo.
As in like the physical
button, like
the way it behaves is programmable.
Yeah. So it's like you can emulate like that feeling that you get with a film camera where it's like you press it part of the way to focus and then all of the way to take a photo and stuff. And
yeah, that's neat.
Like you could have something where like you're ringing the bell on a bicycle, for example, and it has like that constant little friction things as you're pulling the trigger all the way through.
Right. Yep.
So there's like some really nice feeling stuff that you can do with that. And like there's a lot of variety in the sensations you can get from the haptic feedback and stuff. Like it feels like a nice controller.
Yeah.
I tend to play with headphones, so I don't notice this feature very much, but it is also kind of cool. The PlayStation 4 did this too, where they've got a speaker on the controller. So you could have like, I don't know, like footstep sounds or something coming from your controller, whereas like other sounds are coming from your TV, and it gives you more of a three-dimensional feeling.
That is cool. I mean, I'm chuckling a bit just because I remember when that came out on Wii and everyone was excited about it way back when. But it was kind of neat. Even like the speakers sucked at the time, and like they used it to make the Zelda sword swing noise, I think, and some stuff. But yeah,
it's like I feel like it still takes pretty creative use to make use of the feature because the speaker is so terrible. And
Right. But it's there, right?
yeah, but it I don't know, it's weird because it feels more immersive when you're the one with the controller in your hand. But when I'm sitting on the sofa next to my kid and he's using the controller, it feels really weird hearing the sound coming from him.
Yep. Yep. Of
Um,
course it does. I mean, it's designed for that experience, presumably, right? Like with that
yeah,
assumption in mind, not without like worrying too much about like people watching, which is another thing now that we have like streaming as a thing. Any sort of like feedback that is part of the controller that adds to the experience is, of course, totally lost on any observers, right?
yeah,
So, like, even like I was going to say, one thing that was worth highlighting, going through the history of controllers was the Rumble Pack on the Nintendo
yeah,
64, which at the time you either thought was the dumbest thing ever, or you saw that they were starting to come up with these really new creative ways to have like feedback back to the player
yeah,
to like make more immersive experiences. In retrospect, I think it was neat. And then it got kind of standard across controllers
yeah.
by maybe the PlayStation, even late PlayStation 1 era, I guess.
Uh,
Um, Definitely the PlayStation 1 controllers had the two different motors in them to rumble at two different intensities.
huh. I don't remember that. I remember it being in the PlayStation 3, but I don't remember games before that.
It was, I'm almost certain, in PlayStation 1, definitely at least no, it was like Metal Gear Solid 1. The heartbeat, your heart is beating and your controller is shaking. It was definitely in the PlayStation 1 controller.
I have to look it up now because yeah.
You don't
Oh
trust me?
well, no, did PlayStation One have Rumble? Yeah, it did. It was a
It,
feature of the DualShock controller. So I guess that's the problem is that when I owned a PlayStation, I didn't own the DualShock controller.
oh, I so owned that controller and I so thought it was great. You needed
Uh,
it for Metal Gear Solid, man. The heartbeat at the tense parts.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I guess that's the thing is I didn't have the DualShock controller, and I just must have a bad memory, or maybe the games I played on PlayStation Two were all just like um,
Didn't need
Final
it.
Fantasy and stuff that didn't
Yeah.
use it. Um, But the one feature that's weird on the PlayStation controllers is this little touchscreen or touchpad thing. Um, I find it really awkward to use because it's like my controllers are spaced. My thumbs are already like perfectly spaced when they're on the joysticks,
Yep.
and then I have to like reach up and over them. I have to change like in my wrist the way that I'm holding the controller to even access it, and it just feels awkward. And I feel like that's part of the advantage that you get out of like the Oculus controllers is like those gestures doesn't force you to change anything in your wrists. It's like you just move your entire shoulder and arm around, and you can get that sort of gestures and swipes and stuff in that feel quite natural.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I guess like I also find that weird like panel thing on the PlayStation 4 controller really awkward.
Yeah,
But at the same time, I guess I see it as like them taking all the real estate on the controller and just making it useful as much as they can. I do find it awkward. I prefer not to use it. I find it weird when games do use it.
it's such
Um,
a huge, disgustingly ugly button for user interfaces. Like whenever anyone has to show you what button to press,
yeah,
and it's this big weird
press this
rectangular
area. Yeah.
thing.
I was gonna like user interfaces. I mean, the controller itself to me, honestly, is kind of ugly. Like, I think the controller we were just talking about for PlayStation,
Yeah,
original PlayStation DualShock controller, looks nice. If you saw that sitting on the table, you'd be like, "Whoa, cool." PlayStation is it? The PlayStation 5 controllers look a lot better, I think, but PlayStation 4 controllers to me look ugly. I'll say that.
there was a lot of people that were angry at the PlayStation 5 controller because it like looks like it's wearing a pair of overalls and
I'd have to like I don't have it in front of me. Like you own one, of course. I'd have
yeah,
to review. I thought it looked. I mean, anything looks better than that original prototype boomerang
yeah.
PlayStation 3 controller.
Uh, I wish I had have been able to try that.
Dude,
Like
maybe it was great. I don't know.
like
It
they
looked
made
funny
this
though.
shape, arguing that it was like super ergonomic and it felt great. But then as soon as people saw photos of it, they're like,
They're
no,
so upset. Yeah,
hashtag not my PlayStation.
they
Like,
should have just. Yeah, they should have put prototypes everywhere. The backlash against PlayStation 3, I think, was just like so. What's the word I'm looking for? Like you had to if you were against anything about the PlayStation 3, you were against everything about the PlayStation 3, right? Like it was just such a botched announcement or whatever that
yeah,
everyone just wanted to hate every single thing about it. And so I think they kind of found themselves in a situation where there was just no hope. And where,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I should be fair. Without having the controller in my hand, it's hard to make any sort of call. It did look kind of funny, and the jokes were kind of funny.
yeah, yeah.
uh,
It's bananas that it was like so poorly received that they basically just like reverted back to an upgraded PlayStation 2 controller.
yeah, I know, like
Uh,
absolute revert.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
used
yeah,
to be.
that's basically all I got though. Is like I feel like the PlayStation 5 controller actually feels really nice to use. Touchpad
Yeah, yeah.
kind of difficult to make use out of. Um,
I very much like the PlayStation 4 controller, and so I'm just kind of guessing that I would like the 5 based on the fact that for the most part I've liked the whole PlayStation series, but I would have to hold one and use it to make any sort of real judgment here. I think I mean I know we're coming up on time. I think we would be
yeah,
remiss if we failed to mention two more things. One, I just
Virtual
wanted
Boy.
no, that wasn't exactly one, though we could throw that in for chuckles. I was just gonna say I find it really interesting actually, like that the handheld consoles, like Nintendo's handheld consoles, um, like never really. I don't understand why I don't have a handheld console that's basically like a PlayStation controller. It feels like Nintendo in general never really went with like the dual shoulder buttons or like a lot of the later kind of ergonomic choices that PlayStation has made. I feel like when you look at the Xbox controller, the series of Xbox controllers and the series of PlayStation controllers, they're obviously conscious of each other and making design decisions to try and kind of one up the other, while
Yeah,
Nintendo's just kind of walked its own route. But Nintendo was always the king of the portable consoles, and so like of course we got Nintendo controllers, which I don't know. It just would have been neat to have more, I guess, um, like a PlayStation
mm,
controller on a portable console, and you almost got that with the PSP, which had
yeah.
some issues of its own, but like we never got the cool like analog controller buttons. I don't know. It's just I think it's interesting that the controllers seem to have lagged on the portable consoles to me.
Well, it's interesting because there's people that have been made peripherals like that for phones.
Yeah,
Uh, so you can plug like a phone into something that, and there are, I guess people have done that with the Switch too. Like you can get third party Joy Cons that do feel a lot like a PlayStation controller.
right, right.
Um, yeah, I don't really know why that wasn't an approach they took. Like,
Yeah. If you remember Game Boy Advance era, they came out with Game Boy Advance, and we talked about Game Boy Advance recently, and they're putting basically Super Nintendo titles on it and porting a lot over it. But the controller, it had shoulder buttons, which was awesome, but it only had A and B. There's no X,
mm,
Y. And so like you had to get creative with your port to like remap the buttons into this more limited space. But why? Why? To me, I mean, maybe it's like if you hold an original design Game Boy Advance in your hand, there's no reason there couldn't be an X and Y there, right? Like it's not a space issue. The thing is bigger than a Super Nintendo controller, and even with the screen, there's a lot of room to have an X and a Y. I don't
mm.
know. It's just weird choices to me. Um, Cost savings or something. Who knows?
I feel like the Game Gear felt better than the Game Boy for
It,
that reason.
yeah,
Like I guess that was maybe, I don't know. Maybe the what were those ones that would come in like cereal boxes where it was like a,
Tiger electronic
yeah, yeah, the
wristwatches.
Tiger ones. Like maybe those were kind of the start where it was like the screen in the middle and the buttons on the sides, and it it felt good to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I
I
agree.
liked
Agree.
I liked the little nub thing that was on the PSP. The
Little
joystick that was
nub.
like
Oh yeah, yeah. I remember when it came out, and I forget one of the buttons was it like the leftmost button. The Super Nintendo Y button had like the way it was designed, it would catch when you try and push it. I think they
yeah.
fixed that pretty quick for like the second release of the system.
Yeah, I'm looking at that now. I guess the DS Lite didn't have a joystick, but what about the 3DS? Uh 3DS XL.
Yeah, it's got
Yeah,
like a little plug thing.
it had a weird joystick on it too. I feel like I had a problem where my thumb was constantly like slipping off of the joystick.
I'm not the biggest fan of that joystick for sure. I was
But
going to
yeah,
say, I know we're at time here, but I think we should mention the Xbox. What is it? The immersive controller. whatever they call it, the one that's designed for accessibility.
I haven't used it.
I haven't used it either, but I have like my hands are really sore. Like I probably have some sort of weird pre-arthritis, and so I had this idea almost for like a startup or for like a spin-off product to make like this controller that was honestly basically exactly what Xbox went and did, what Microsoft went and did. Like that was my idea, man. But seriously, like when I saw they came out with that, I was like, oh, like I can't believe this didn't exist for the last 20 years. Like it just seems to make so much sense to me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I myself haven't used it, which is weird considering how excited I was about it. But I think it's an awesome idea. Maybe a future episode we could play with it or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I almost feel like I should pick up one of those at some point. I just don't never use my Xbox.
Well, I think it's general purpose effectively. Like you can use it for whatever indie games and whatnot, like connected to a gaming
On a
PC or
PC.
something. Yeah. I mean, I've honestly thought about it. I play Smash Brothers now, still like Melee. I know it's not really kosher or like tournament kosher to go with like a different controller, but the GameCube controller, first of all, they break so easy, and second of all, it just hurts my hands. And so like having that option to go with that kind of thing is just really really cool to me. And I think when they came out with it, they were, if I recall correctly, like they were particularly highlighting like how people with maybe like deformities or other hand issues or even diseases
Yeah.
that keep them from like using a controller like most of the controllers are designed to be used. They were just highlighting how it's so much easier for those people. So I mean, I don't know. As far as like now that it's 2021 and not the 80s, and people actually care about accessibility and stuff like that, it seems like something that should get more focus to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd kind of forgotten about that. I remember a lot of people were definitely excited about that. I don't see any sort of options for something like that for the PlayStation 5.
I don't know that it has. Can you even plug in? Can you just like plug in a USB controller and play with it? I don't know if that's a thing.
I don't know. I mean, there are USB ports, but so I mean, a third party could make something like that, I'm sure. And
You think, yeah.
um,
Maybe the accessible. We'd have to play with the Xbox One. Maybe it uses Bluetooth. I don't even know. I mean, I imagine it does.
I mean, it's an official Xbox periphery. Yeah, it looks like an interesting thing to try getting used to. I'm kind of talking. Oh yeah, so it includes Xbox wireless Bluetooth and USB-C connectivity.
That makes sense. I mean, it's meant to be.
Now,
you should be able to use it.
Now I see the word USB-C, and that is, man, we are over time already, but that's already setting me off because I remember the Xbox One controllers. The Xbox One controllers and the Joy-Cons both make me quite angry. The Xbox controller because it uses the micro USB connector, and like I was working on Gears of War 4, and we just had a stockpile of spare cables on stock because those controllers would just destroy the cables.
Really?
And
Wow.
like you could only use them for a few weeks at a time before you'd have to just replace the cable and get a new one, which is absolutely terrible.
What is it that breaks? Like the connector at the controller location?
Yeah, it's like the same sort of problem that we had with the Nintendo when you'd use like the Game Genie or something, where it would just like bend the little prongs.
Okay, yeah.
Only it's like the controller itself would bend the prongs on the cable. So then you'd have a loose connection, and your controller would stop working.
And you have that problem with the Switch as well?
No, the problem that I have with the Switch is just I got angry about one controller, and then it reminded me that I'm angry about the other controller.
The commonality here is the anger.
Yeah. It's
it.
the Joy-Con drift. It's I have what's it, electronic contact cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
I just have cans on that on stock because it's constantly drifting, and I have to like stick the little spray bottle underneath the little dust jacket, squirt in some contact cleaner, and swirl the joystick around until it's clean, and then it'll work fine for like another week or two, and then I have to do the same thing again. Like I get so much Joy-Con drift, and I'm not the only one. There's like lawsuits against Nintendo and stuff. It's like the first time I had drift, there was a class action suit, and Nintendo was offering, okay, you send us your controller and we'll fix it for free. So I did that, and it was literally like 2 months and then the Joy Cons are drifting again, and by that point, like the pandemic was starting, and it's like you can't send stuff in to get fixed anymore. So that's where I realized from reading around online that the contact cleaner is all you need. Um, but yeah, I feel like that's really bad design. Like my PlayStation 3 controllers have been used hundreds and hundreds of more hours and are still working fine.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a museum worth of controllers that work great and range in age from like whatever 5 years to 30. So it's crazy to have brand new controllers having issues like that, even if they're more complex beasts.
Yeah.
Yep, indeed. I have two kids awake now, so I think I'm going to have to run here.
All right.
That's where
Well,
my threshold is. I'm well beyond the threshold. So.
all right. Well, good talking.
Good talking. Enjoy that PlayStation 5 with its sweet controller.
I'm going to.
Good.
All right.
All right, brother. Take
See you
care.
next time.
Cheers.